The source element is the final part of the reference entry in APA style, and it has the most variation in what data is included. Again, I can't cover every possible situation, especially with source elements, so looking in the manual and on the APA style website will be necessary. The source element answers the question, where can it be found? It includes information about the specific publication you are looking for, as well as a DOI or URL to retrieve the work whenever possible. Similar to the title element, there are two broad categories of works. For standalone works, you'll need information like who the publisher is, what the parent organization is, or what website is hosting the web page. For greater whole works, you'll need information about the larger work that contains the article, episode, chapter, etc. This information includes things like the title of the journal or book, the website that hosts the social media post or video, or the name of a podcast or television series. Because there is a lot of variation in what information you include as part of the source element, we'll be focusing on the format of the works more than we have in other videos. Again, I also can't cover every possible variation, so becoming familiar with this section of the manual and website and navigating citation examples will be very helpful. Periodicals are published periodically on a fairly regular schedule, i.e. daily, weekly, monthly, or quarterly. Academic journals will probably be the most cited works in your academic projects. Earlier in your citations, you should have information about the specific author and title of an article that is part of a whole, so now you need to include information that helps your reader find the whole work. This includes the periodical's title in its entirety, the volume, issue, and page or article numbers. You should always end with a hyperlinked URL or DOI if it exists. On these examples, note that PLOS 1 is abbreviated because that is how it appears on its website and on its publications. Also, article numbers are becoming more popular as journals are only published online and aren't actually bound together. The information you need to include for other part of whole works greatly depends on the format of the work. Think about how a book is published versus how an album is produced versus how a podcast is created. If there are editors, you include their names before any other source information. Their names are kind of reversed from how they would be represented in the author element, with their first initial followed by their surname and the ed period notation. APA doesn't give a reason for this flip, so just go with it. Then include the title of the larger work and more specific information like edition, volume, and page range. You should also include the company, publisher, or imprint that produced the work. Finally, include a hyperlinked DOI or URL if it exists. Like the part of whole works on the last slide, the source element for standalone works varies by media formats. Standalone works tend to have very little information in the source element because most of that information you need to locate these works is in earlier elements. But you will often see publishers, parent organizations, and of course a hyperlinked DOI or URL. One thing to note is that if you used a group or organization's name as an author, it shouldn't be repeated in the source element, even if it doesn't have a parent organization. You shouldn't include the database where you found the work, with a few exceptions. Most academic works like journals and books can be licensed by multiple database vendors, so some scholars might access an article through an EBSCOhost database, while other scholars might access the same article through JSTOR. Only include a location for a publisher or organization if the work is directly associated with a location. The APA manual focuses on conferences or archives, but graduate students' thesis or dissertations should also include their school as a location. Include retrieval dates for most websites, especially if they are likely to change or update. I would go so far as to include the retrieval date more often than not because the internet changes so frequently. The radical changes to and deletions of U.S. government websites in early 2025 is an excellent example of why retrieval dates are useful. Include short, stable links to works whenever possible. These links should lead readers directly to the work, so link to the article instead of the journal, the web page on a website, or a comment on a post. Links provided by some library-provided databases are often proxied and will not allow access to all readers, or the content is available through several different databases, thus they shouldn't be used. Instead, find a DOI if at all possible, or you can leave it out entirely. Check section 9.34 if you don't believe me. However, your professor may ask you to include them in student work for ease of access. Some works are not recoverable because they might be in your inbox or were a speech you heard in person, for example. These works should only be cited in the text and not included in the reference list. These should also be fairly rare in most academic works. Unrecoverable works also include broken links. If the link was working when you submitted or published your work, it's fine. But if it has broken in between the time you initially found it and your submission, you should try to find an archived version on the Internet Archive. If it hasn't been archived, delete the reference and substitute another if possible. Let's take a look at some examples of sources in a published reference list. Most of the references are academic journal articles, which is expected as this reference list is from an academic journal article. Notice that almost every reference has a DOI attached to it, and a couple use an article number instead of a page range. One criticism of this list that I have is that the one website they are referencing does not have a retrieval date, especially as the publication date is also missing. Now we'll look at some examples of finding source information on published works that we intend to cite. We're going to start again with our PDF of a journal article that we've seen before. Now, again, individual journal articles will often have, their title, authors, and dates fairly prominently displayed. The source information is often helpfully formatted up at the top. So in this case, we have School Health 2024 with a volume number and a page range as well as a DOI, right? So they've kind of formatted that source information up in a header for us. Other times it may be towards the bottom of a page, or it may kind of come on headers on multiple pages as well. If you are looking for the source element information on a results list from either Quick Search or one of the other library databases, most of that will be kind of collected around the title and author and date that you saw before. But notice in this case that there isn't a URL or DOI associated with it. Now, sometimes you will be able to grab a permalink to this, but this is not specific to the journal article itself. It just leads you back to this result. So I would not use this. I would instead go and try to find a DOI that is associated with this. To do that, you will probably have to go to the actual journal's page through its publisher, Springer. Now, most of that source element content will again be grouped towards the top. We see the volume and page numbers along with the date and the title of the title of the journal itself, but we don't see any DOI. So we could try to use the link up at the top, but again, depending on what database this is or how the journal is published, it may not lead directly back to this, and there might be a proxy that's associated with it. So a good place to kind of find a DOI, if it is not listed up at the top here, is actually scrolling all the way to the bottom of the article, past references and everything. And typically there's an about section, or there might be another kind of formatted section that lists out the DOI down here. You also see that it has a suggestion on how to cite this article, but that is definitely not APA format, so don't use that. Don't just copy that citation that you see there. With physical media, obviously there won't be a URL or DOI to retrieve this because you didn't find it online, you found it in real life. But we still need to supply a publisher or an imprint name to it. So on the title page of most books, down towards the bottom, there should be the publisher or imprint that is responsible for this. And in this case, it's Nation Books, so that's the one that we're going to use. If you look at the copyright page, it gets a little bit more complicated because Nation Books is an imprint of Hachette, but again, we need to go for the most specific organization from this company, so we're going to use Nation Books. And again, we don't need to add in a location because it's a major publisher. Source information from online media can be a little bit tricky to kind of track down, so we're going to go through several different examples here. We're going to start with this report from the Pew Research Center, and remember that this actually had individual authors attached to it. So we actually need to use the Pew Research Center as the publishing organization. And in this case, we would also grab the URL from the top browser bar, and because this is the most direct way that we found it, it's an open free resource online. Okay. With online news sources, it's important to recognize the paper or the organization that is publishing these stories. In this case, we're looking at AP News, so there's the AP logo up here, and you can grab the URL from that browser bar at the top. For YouTube videos and other social media, you actually use the platform as a publisher. So in this case, I would use YouTube as the source and include a URL to it. Now again, if you look at share, there's this kind of short truncated URL, or you could even grab the watch one up at the top. It really doesn't matter which one you use. With this webpage from the APA style site, we've already credited the American Psychological Association as the author because there is no individual author listed for this page. So we don't need to repeat that organization in the source. But we should note that this is the APA style website and not another site that is coming from the American Psychological Association. So I would include the title of the website and then as well as grab that URL from the top browser bars. Similarly to the APA's disability site, this Helping Americans site, we've already used the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development as the author, so we don't need to repeat their name in the source elements at all. And because U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development is a top-level cabinet position, there aren't any parent organizations that we need to respect above them. This would be different if we were citing something like from the CDC, because the CDC is has other parent organizations above it, including the National Institutes of Health and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Okay, but in this case, we really just have to grab that URL at the top and of course include a retrieval date, specifically because this one does not have a publishing date on it. If you are at all confused about the U.S. government kind of structure, the U.S. government manual is a really good place to kind of look to see what department lives under who. So you can see that there's, in addition to some of our founding documents over here, there's an organizational chart of the U.S. government, and this at least gives you kind of the different branches as well as the full executive branch, and then if there are any individual independent establishments and government corporations that don't necessarily live under a specific one. If you're looking for parent organizations or what department lives under which branch, you can actually scroll down onto the executive branch departments and click on them and then look through. So if we again look at Department of Health and Human Services, because there's a lot, you can actually kind of list out the ones that you'll see here. So for example, the CDC is under this Department of Health and Human Services, and like under the National Institutes of Health. Again, there are multiple organizations that are under here, so that you might want to, that will again go through that parent organization structure. Thank you for watching. Please see other videos in this series for more APA content.